Alright, let's go ahead and begin. So the goal of this presentation is actually going to be for you guys to understand what is actually happening in the back end of SOLIDWORKS every time you open up a file, assembly, or drawing. So I'm sure a lot of you have gotten issues where the file references ended up getting broken. It's just something that happens with SOLIDWORKS. So there's a lot of information on the back end that we're gonna shed some light on here. All right. So essentially, we're gonna talk about everything that derives the fact that this window comes up in your computer. So I'm sure you guys have gotten this. I mean, nobody is immune to this unless you're actually using PDM. If you guys are aware of what PDM is, that's wonderful. You don't really have to worry too much about this, but this still affects it. Okay, so the common scenarios are that my bad, you guys are not using PDM. Just so you know, if you were to have SOLIDWORKS Professional or Premium, you do have PDM Standard available, which will take care of a lot of these problems. Next thing is generic and duplicate file names. So I'm sure everybody out there is right now using some assembly that has some part called Part 1 or Assembly 1 or some other generic name. Having names like that will accidentally cause external references if you're not aware of what's happening. Also, using network drives can be a pretty big problem, since network drives don't have an inherent ability to know what's going on with the SOLIDWORKS files. They're just files in the end. Also, if you've actually selected the Don't Show Again checkbox in any dialog box that has come up in as you're using SOLIDWORKS, there's a lot of information that people forget. They're being told by SOLIDWORKS because they clicked that option. Okay, but I'll show you how to bring that back. And of course, number one, it's Monday. All right, so a couple of things that you must know. First of all, every single SOLIDWORKS file doesn't just go by the name. It actually contains an internal ID that SOLIDWORKS utilizes to identify a certain file. So if you guys open up a file that has the same name as the one you meant to open, but it wasn't originally the same file, you're going to get a message like this. Okay, this is actually telling you that this file does not have the same internal ID that SOLIDWORKS was expecting to get. So if you were to select this option, Don't Show Again, anytime this is happening, it's no longer going to tell you, and you're not going to know that you're actually grabbing the wrong file. This may be fine if it's a small file or a small assembly and you can tell the geometry isn't right. But what if you're working with an assembly that has 20 components, 100, 150 or more? You're not going to be able to see that, especially if that file is actually hidden inside other assemblies or it's an internal component. So selecting that option is one of the main reasons that people don't realize when problems are happening. Okay, so beware of that. Next thing is, whenever you actually click that Don't Show Again option, you're actually making it so SOLIDWORKS doesn't show you the message. If you go into Tools and Options, and then in Messages, Errors, Warnings, there is this option right here, or this little window. This is going to show every message that you have dismissed. So if you're having external reference issues, you might want to check this and then make sure that you bring all of these back so that you can see what's happening in your assembly. Now, as a plus, this little area right here, this actually allows you to control the counter that you have on your on this window right here. By default, it's set to I think 8 or 10 seconds, which is definitely not enough for us to really realize what's happening with that file path. So that option back there is actually going to allow you to increase that to 30 seconds. Okay. So next thing is going to be the fact that there's a lovely little option when you go to your Tools and Options and to your file locations in SolidWorks. This option is here. It's called Edit All. It was added in 2017, I believe. What this does is this is actually going to open up a table of all of your file locations. So here you're going to be able to see if maybe some of your SolidWorks file locations, like your document templates or BOM templates, are actually pointing at some other location that you're not expecting it to. So if you had multiple versions of SolidWorks installed in one computer, you might actually still be referring to files that come from previous versions. Okay, here there's also a very nifty tool called Find and Replace, where you can actually just have it update, let's say 2017 file locations to your 2020 installation. Okay, so let's go ahead and show you where that's at. So here in Tools and Options and File Locations, regardless of what you select here, you can click the Edit All button, and then this is where you get that list of everything. So in my case, I already updated everything to 2020, but if you were to have anything coming from 2019, let's say this material database, if it's coming from 2019, I could update it to 2020 just by using this Find and Replace, find 2017 and replace it with 2020. And the moment I click Replace or Replace All, you're going to see that's going to change right away. Oh, wait, that was 2019. Replace All. Now it also shows you in green what are the fields that ended up changing, so that you can also review that and make sure that you're pointing at the right place. Okay. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Alright, so what's actually happening when you open up an assembly? SolidWorks actually has 7 locations. 7 locations that it's actually going through before you get that little pop-up that tells you that it's unable to locate the file location. Okay, so it's actually tested with some built-in intelligence, different places where it could have found the file. So if you have a collaborative environment where you have your users work on an assembly that's saved on the network drive, and you guys are working live in a network drive, you guys could accidentally overwrite each other's work. So we highly recommend that you guys avoid working in these type of collaborative environments with the files live. Just make a copy of them, put them in your local computer, and then work on them from there. Now, when I say collaboration environments, I'm referring to folder sharing. So folder sharing would be the case where, let's say, John is in the office and everything is fine. Mark is in the office as well. When suddenly Mark goes home, there's all of these files that are no longer accessible, because turns out John's computer was actually set to automatically connect to the network drive on Mark's computer. This is highly, we highly discourage doing this type of setup. Now, if you use a network drive, this means that there is a server folder or a server hard drive where you guys are accessing it directly to work on those files. When you do that, you're actually at risk of getting file corruption, just because all you need is one bit of data missing while you're actually saving a file or trying to open it for it to actually be corrupt. Okay, and if you're doing a network drive, ideally you have IT who set up a daily backup of your files. But if that's not the case, that file that you have, once it's corrupt, that's it. It's gone. And last case would be cloud storage. Also, we highly recommend not to use cloud storage just because there's no redundancy checks when you save any SolidWorks files. If, again, the data ends up getting missing just one bit as it's being transferred from your computer back and forth, that file will be corrupt, and there's not much you can do about that. So when you end up getting a broken external reference, is there a way to fix it? Yes, there is. You can individually change what files SolidWorks is looking for, and you do have some mask control, but it can get messy. So how to fix a single file? So let's say you open up an assembly and it's opening up the wrong file. Well, you can actually go to File, Open. In the Open dialog box, when you click an assembly or a part or a drawing, you have this button right here, References. When you click that, it's going to actually load up the different files that it's trying to find and the locations where they're found. If you select the file itself, you can actually have it point to another file with a different name. This will update both the file name and the folder location. If you just select the folder location, you could just have SOLIDWORKS point at another folder where you move the file to. So next, starting 2019, we now have the recent files window. Well, actually no, I think 2018. But in 2019, they added this particular little double down arrow right on the lower right corner of each tile. When you click that, you end up having access to the same options you had in the File Open dialog box. So here you also have access to that References button, which will bring you to the same window that you would go to if you went through the File Open documents. Now, starting 2020, you can actually right mouse click in File Explorer and then utilize the SOLIDWORKS option and select Open, which will bring you over to the Open File location where you can select the References button. Once again, taking you to the same place where you can repoint SOLIDWORKS to the file that you want to use. Let's go ahead and show you how that works out. So here we have this assembly, just a little drone. If we go to Find References, we can see that the file prop right here is coming from D, Custom Classes, Skillshare, File Management, and Models. If I wanted it to point elsewhere, I would have to close this assembly. I can use the Recent dialog box right here. Go to References. And here I have a prop. I'm going to double click it. And let's say I'm planning to move this to another folder, say just out here. Then I can select the file that I want to exchange it to, and then it will show you in green what file is actually going to, what folder is going to open that file from. Likewise, I could double click this file, and instead of utilizing that folder or that file right there, I could have it point at a completely random file. In this case, now the name is also changed to green. It's going to try to open up this different file because you told it to. Yeah, even though it doesn't mean that it's a proper file. Okay. The moment you click OK, this is when once I tell it that I want to change the references, let me do that again. And then I say open. This is the first time that it's going to try to open up with that file, and the changes will not be taken until you actually save the file. Okay, so the file references option is not a change on the file until you open it and then save it. That's what's going to write the new file location in there. So right now, because I did not save, if I look at the references, it's still looking for prop and in that folder location. Okay. All right. So then, what about mass fixes? So there was a very friendly website link from the SOLIDWORKS help. If you search for SOLIDWORKS search routines and then SOLIDWORKS help, it'll take you to that the web page. It is not the most useful. It is not the most helpful, but we're going to break it down here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to have a particular scenario to hopefully help you guys figure out what are these different search paths that are happening. So what I have here is a top-level assembly drone, which is saved in the folder project A. And now I'm going to move that drone file over to my C drive, a completely separate drive, under two folders, new and folder. Next thing, this file body is not moved, it stays in place. Nothing happens with that file, it stays right there. And then next, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this file, prop. And it's going to be missing either because of being saved elsewhere, being renamed, or it was deleted. Whatever it is that could have happened in your company. Okay, so we move the assembly from one folder to another drive and a different folder set, and we erase one file. So, what are those 7 locations? These are it. And if you read them one by one, you'll realize that they don't really mean much if they're not well explained. These were written by somebody who codes. Now, what matters here the most is the fact that for the first 2 steps, you actually have active control over those 2 locations. Step 3 through 7, you actually don't really get to have control other than the fact that you can tell where SOLIDWORKS is going to open the file from. So these other ones from 3 to 7 will happen no matter what every time you open an assembly. So if you are working on an assembly that has just a couple of locations that need to be updated, that might just take milliseconds to be found. But if you have hundreds of files, those milliseconds will add up. So the fact that SOLIDWORKS has to search through all these locations can also mean that you may perceive lower performance while opening files. So let's go ahead and go through all of these. The first step is SOLIDWORKS uses any file name that is currently open, that is currently in RAM, to load in an assembly that contains that same file name. It doesn't care if the file matches or not. It just goes off of the name. And here you want to be careful when you use save as. We'll cover what happens with save as later on in this webinar. So in this case, I'm going to have an apple that was part of a little diorama, and the apple is called prop. If the file prop, that is the apple, is open, when I open up the assembly that contains a prop, it's actually not going to care about the fact that the geometry is different, and it's just going to go ahead and then slap those apples right in there. The moment that you click save, now you've told SOLIDWORKS this is the file that is meant to be part of your assembly. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So, let's see. Okay. So here I have my file prop, which is just an apple. If now I end up going ahead and opening up that assembly that I opened back then, what's going to happen is because the file prop is open, then SOLIDWORKS is going to load, let's see, prop into memory. Where are you? Oh, my bad. I myself dismissed some messages. So let me come in here, look at my messages, errors and warnings, and look at this right here. The document being open referenced a file with the same name, etc., etc. I need that to pop up. If it doesn't pop up, I will not know that I broke my references. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK to those. This one as well, to bring it back. And now I'm going to reopen this assembly. Okay, now I get this message. It tells me that the file that I'm about to open has the same name but a different document ID essentially. And I want to tell it to accept this file anyway. What happened just a second ago is I had selected the do not show option and then chose open without this document. Okay, because I know to bring back that dismiss message, then I know that this should have popped up. Okay, so accept this file anyway. Let's let it revealed, and you'll see that at first it's going to look like things are fine. Oh. All right. And so my prop ended up coming in. Naturally, a lot of mates broke. Naturally, a lot of my mates broke because I told them to use another part where the faces don't exist. Right? And this happened because I had the file called prop already open in memory. At this moment, I'm still fine. If I close this assembly, the change has not been written into this assembly because I did not click save. So if I close this, close the apple, and open the assembly once again, everything will be fine because it knows to go and look for the proper prop file. So I have a window popping up somewhere that I cannot see. There we go. Okay. Alright, so you see now we have the props and everything is fine. Okay, let's go ahead and close this guy. So next, the second location, you actually have control over turning this on or off. It's found under Tools, Options, External References, and you want to check the option to utilize reference documents in file locations. This button right here. Okay. So this will open up another option where you will actually add a particular location where you want files to be open from. This is going to be the second step. So if you have a location here and then you enable that option, SOLIDWORKS will look for your files right in there. Oh, here, one sec. I got a few questions here. So one of the questions here is asking if you have a read-only assembly and other components are read-only as well, it's going to ask you to save those components. So the option you actually want to take into account here is this one. Go to Tools and Options, External References. The second option from the top, do not prompt to save read-only files. So this way, if you have write access to only one file and everything else is not, when you click save in the assembly, you will not get prompted for all those other components. Okay, that option right there. Let's see. So I see a question here, says, is there a version save option so that you could save, let's say SLD part 1, part 2, part 3, and so that you can go back and open prior versions? You right there are describing PDM. But we're not going to cover PDM on this webinar, but it's a tool that, again, if you have SOLIDWORKS Professional or Premium, comes included with your license. And PDM is a version control and revision, a version and revision control tool. Okay. All right. So, like I mentioned, any folder that's added into this location is going to be searched for. Okay, and this is you have active control on this one. So let me go back to SOLIDWORKS and then go back to my model here. What is happening here? Oh, I see. Okay. All right. So this prop file, let's see where it's coming from. I'll right-click it and select this component properties option. It's coming from custom classes, skill share, file management, models, prop. This is the same place that is coming from with every other file in this assembly. Let's look at it here. There it is. So I want to utilize that second location by forcing it to open this file from elsewhere. So let's go to Tools and Options, External References. I'm going to enable this option, reference document specified in a particular file location. And I can either click this button, go to Reference Documents, or I can go to File Locations and select the option Reference Documents here. In this case, it's actually searching through my folders in my design libraries. So let me go ahead and remove them for this example. And I'm going to add a new folder. And just to make sure that we can see the difference, I'm just going to create a folder here on the desktop. Just going to call it File Reference Test. And I'm going to add my file. Well, I'm going to select this folder. So any file that is found in this folder will be utilized to open up this assembly. Click Accept. Accept all the changes that Windows wants. And then let me go copy that file to that folder. Okay, so let's cut this guy. Go to Desktop, File Type, Reference Test. Boom. Now we have the prop file coming from that folder. Because I selected my option right here, it will now look into this folder before opening the file. So let me go ahead and close this. Open it up again. Oh, that was the apple. My bad. It's telling me that it's got the same name but not matching internal ID. I'm going to tell it use it anyway. So it's going to open up the apple, I believe. Yep. So it opened up the apple, but guess what it opened it from? It opened the file prop from Users, Eric, Desktops, File References. It actually went... Yeah, can everybody see the screen? Okay, give me 1 sec here. How about now? Can you guys see the screen now? Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. Thanks for the heads up. Okay, so now, if you guys couldn't see that, I was just showing here once again that I went to External References. I checked the option Reference Document Specified in File Locations. I went to File Locations and Reference Documents, added the folder that comes from my desktop. And so now, I didn't realize that the prop that I copied was actually the apple, not the actual prop. So when I open up my assembly, it tells me, oh, this doesn't have the matching ID. I forgot that I picked the apple, not the prop. But let's see what it does. I tell it to open with that file anyway. And now if I look at my file references, the prop has actually come from my desktop folder. So you see, in this case, I didn't have to worry too much about pointing the file. I can just tell it to use that option so that it searches in that folder. So if I were to actually turn it off, it simply will not read from that location. So let me close this again and then just open it up again. There it is, prop coming from the same folder where everything else is coming from. Okay? So that is the last active control that you have in those locations. So let's go back to the presentation here. Let's see. Okay, got a few other questions here. Do you recommend using revision details in SOLIDWORKS file name? So instead of using revisions in the file names, you actually would want to use PDM or the custom properties in your file so that you can actually display that information in your drawings. Okay, so let me show you what I mean by that. So this whole assembly, okay, if I were to put any revision information on the file name, that's not a bit of data that I can show separately in a drawing. Instead, if I come to this button here, File Properties, if I have right there, a custom property where I have a revision, I could actually utilize this particular data to be inputted into a drawing automatically. So once again, this is where I would add the revision information of your file. Let's see. Okay. All right. So let's keep going with the presentation here. All right. So that's the third location. The third location that SOLIDWORKS describes is this verbatim. Searches the path of the active document, then recursively searches the path where the reference document was last saved. I don't expect that really means anything to most people, right? What this means is SOLIDWORKS actually has about 10 or more locations that it ends up searching for that file that it cannot find right away. Now, the amount of locations is going to depend on your folder structure. So what's going to happen right here, okay, is we're looking for the prop folder, for the prop file, a new folder, and we're not going to find it there. So SOLIDWORKS is going to go through all of these little processes of searching within the folders that it was last found, and then try to go to different locations in your computer with that same folder structure. So just to remind you, we moved the drone assembly from the C drive, project A, into the D drive, and then the prop file is going to be gone. So first, SOLIDWORKS is going to grab that folder location, new folder, and then try to find that prop file in that same folder where the assembly is found. Next, it's going to grab the parts. Actually, let me use a laser here. It's going to grab the parts folder, superpose it over the folder where the assembly exists, and then try to find prop. Essentially this. The next location is going to be by adding the next folder here, random parts. Once it fails and doesn't find a file there, Just gonna go ahead and then do the same trick again. This time adding the next folder, project A, right there. So this is essentially what recursively means. It remembers the path right here, and so it tries to find that file in the assemblies folder, and it slowly starts adding the folders that existed on the last assembly. So there's actually memory remembering where these files were found. So we'll keep going down through the list here, because the next step is going to be SOLIDWORKS will get rid of this folder, and then just grab that whole folder structure and bring it one folder up in the structure. So the next location is going to be just the new folder. It'll just search for parts with the prop file. If it fails, just like before, it'll go ahead and then now bring in the next folder up the chain, and then the next one, it'll go ahead and then grab project A from where the part file was found. And once that's finished, it's actually not done yet. Now it'll just go ahead and insert this folder structure in the C drive. So it'll just, well, sorry, not in the C drive, in the drive where the assembly is found. In this case, the D drive. So it will actually search for parts, prop, then search for the folder random with parts, and then the file prop, and then one more time grab the whole folder structure that it knows the part should be found in, and then try to put it on the C drive. So what you might be saying right now or thinking is, really? Does it actually do that? Can it do that? Well, let's go ahead and show you how it does that. One second here. Okay. Right. So let's go ahead and show you how it does that. Because essentially what I'm saying is, if you have an assembly with that has parts in a folder structure, and then you grab that one part and then put it on the root folder with the same folder structure, it's going to find it? I mean, it sounds kind of outlandish, right? Well, let's go ahead and try it out. So let's go ahead and close this assembly. Okay. So my assembly here, my top level assembly that's it right there. Drone SlimB assembly. Within, I have a sub-assembly that is utilized. Let me open up the assembly just so you see that. Oh, did I not fix this? I didn't fix that. Okay. Give me 1 sec. Okay, so right now it could not find my... Actually, this is perfect. I tried to open up my assembly, and so what it's telling me is that every file that is in the same folder as the top level assembly was found. But then within this sub-assembly, FPV stack, there is a file, M2 screw, which is not found. It could not open that. That's actually a screw that goes right in here. So, if we look at the folder structure that we have here, oh, not this one. And we look in here, this is that file that I'm trying to open, but I changed the name to break it on purpose. So if I make a copy of, if by what I said is true, if I make a copy of this file and then bring it over to my D drive, create a folder called FPV stack, and then paste this file in there and call it the proper name. So if I would have just moved my file into a similar folder structure, here so it's a little clearer, let me do this. Let's go back to my folder. Okay. So my top level assembly was originally looking for the file found in this folder, FPV stack, for this screw that I renamed so I couldn't find it, right? And this is where the assembly is coming from. What I've done is I grabbed that file and then I added it to the D drive into a folder called FPV stack, same name as this one here. Okay. Now that I've done that, according to what I told you a second ago, SOLIDWORKS would essentially be opening up the file from this scenario right here, right? Which is one of the outlandish ones that sounds too good to be true. Well, let's go ahead and open it again. I open that same assembly. And look at that, no errors. There's my bolt, and if we look at the find references option, there's my screw. It came right from that root level folder where you found the file. Okay. So you can utilize this to your advantage. If there was a previous question here, let's see if we can find it. Okay. So somebody that doesn't have PDM or PLM, and one of the problems is the file structure that is utilized in their models. Is there a guide to follow how to manage these structures? Well, if you, one thing I would recommend is if you have different projects, right, left and right, honestly, the safest thing would be to dump every single file for that project into one single folder. Because in that case, if you accidentally break a reference, you can just grab that file and then put it in the same folder as the assembly. And because of these locations, it's going to automatically find that file. So essentially this one up here, okay, the first scenario, it's actually telling you that if you break a reference on an assembly or sub-assembly, if you grab that part and then put it on the same folder as your top level assembly, it's going to find it. So keeping everything in one folder is super helpful. If you have a folder structure, remember these three or these last steps also take place. So in case you break anything, I'll put the list of the files that are broken and then just copy them in a folder in your root root folder on your root drive, and then put those files in there, and SOLIDWORKS will find them. Got another question asking, can we control these locations? You can only control the first two, which is if you have a file with a particular file name open in memory, and then you open an assembly that contains that same name, that's going to cause the crossover. So make sure you close generically named parts. And the second one is the external references option in tools and options, okay, where you tell it what folder it should be opening from. This step 3 and everything else we're going to talk about now is passive. You do not have active control of it. It always happens. So I see one of the questions is, how do you tell SOLIDWORKS to open an assembly only from a specific folder? Ideally, you should be using this only when you're trying to fix up your references. This is where you come to, once again, Tools and Options, External References, enable this option, and then add that folder right here. So if you're using PDM, it's a good idea to actually add your vault right here, because this is the second place that SOLIDWORKS will look for a file. As soon as it finds it, it stops the search. Okay. So let me go back to the presentation. Okay. The fourth place where SOLIDWORKS searches for a file. Let me just read it. It searches the path where you last opened a document and then recursively searches the path where the reference document was last saved. Again, what does that really mean, right? So this is essentially the same scenario that we saw with the third step, where I showed you that SOLIDWORKS will grab the folder structure of the file that it cannot find and then superpose it on the folder structure of your assembly, and then slowly go up the folders in your assembly and then keep on searching. So what's different here is this is a scenario that only applies to one particular moment. That is, if you have an assembly currently open or a file currently open in SOLIDWORKS, and then you drag and drop a component from Windows Explorer into that assembly. So this only applies, once again, when you drag and drop a file to add it to an assembly. So what happens here is you have two definitions, the active document and the last open document. Because the existing assembly in SOLIDWORKS was opened last, that's the last one, and then the active document is the assembly that you dragged and dropped. So here, what SOLIDWORKS will do is, if it does not find the part for the sub-assembly that you just added, it's going to do that same recursive search that we went through on the last step for the file location that you just dragged in, and then superpose it on the folder structure of the sub-assembly that was already open. So just to give you a visual cue of what it looks like. Okay, so once again, we move the drones assembly from the project A down to the D drive, and then we're going to go through each one of these. So it's the same thing, just taking the reference of this right here being for the file that's already open, and all of these new locations that are going to be searched are for the reference of this file that you dragged and dropped. Okay. So I guess you might think, well, so what does this one really matter? If, let's say, one of those screws that you see right there, okay, is called screw, and if you look at your top level assembly, well, there's motors there as well, and those motors are also attached via screws. If you selected, if the name of those are just called screws, because let's say you downloaded it from McMaster and decided to change the name to just screw, and these are matching the same name, the moment that you add it in via drag and drop, first you're going to accidentally redirect these bolts right here to be utilized with the bolts that were in the sub-assembly, because the ones in the sub-assembly were already in memory. Screws is where I see this happen the most often, just because if you have a 5/8 bolt where you should have an M2, you'll notice. But if you have an M2 where you had an M3, good luck realizing that geometrically. Okay, so be aware of what you're doing when you're dragging and dropping those files in your assemblies. So those are all called prop. Right? When you drag and drop that sub-assembly in there, if I would have called my bolts prop instead of screw, and then I add it to my sub-assembly, to my top level assembly, drag and drop, what's going to happen is we're going to get all of those screws to load with the existing file prop. Here it's pretty evident. Not always will it be. Now, this could actually save your butts. If you did not dismiss this, if you did not click this option at any time that you've been using SOLIDWORKS, or you remember to dismiss it, this is going to come up and you're going to be fine, because this is going to tell you, hey, by the way, this file, same name, different ID. Are you sure you want to open it, or should we just suppress it? If you did dismiss this message, I hope you remember at some point in the near future that you did, and then go in there and dismiss it and bring it back, because this is going to be your saving grace. Okay, so here, got a question here. Should we have that option checked? I'm not exactly sure. Are you referring to the option for external references for file locations? Let's see. Let's see. Okay, and we are recording this session, and we will post it later on. All right, so in terms of naming SOLIDWORKS drawings relative to the parts, do you recommend using different file names? No, you're fine. Drawings, SOLIDWORKS does recognize the fact that a name has an SLD PRT extension, or it has an assembly extension or drawing extension. So in that case, there will be no problem. Okay, the fifth step where this happens, or the fifth location that SOLIDWORKS searches for files. It searches the path where the software last found a reference document. What this is saying, oh, let me come back here. Okay, is that when I opened up this assembly drone, SOLIDWORKS was able to successfully find this file, body. Because of this, it's a safe assumption that it's quite possible that that file that's missing might be found in the same folder. And so it goes ahead and it searches for that missing file in the same folder as the last part that just opened. So again, this may take half a second or less, right, milliseconds. But if it's doing this for many parts, you're going to be taking quite a while for the assembly to open, and probably even open it with the wrong file name. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So to show you that, let's go back to SOLIDWORKS and close this guy. Okay. So here I have my top level assembly. Let me open that in SOLIDWORKS meanwhile. Okay. So what I have here is I have a component called Pico BLX. This is a microcontroller for this, and then the M2 screw open in it. This is a folder where I have all of the other sub-assemblies. So let's take a look at the file references here. Okay. So as you can see, found that one. I don't want it to find this one right now, so I'm going to go ahead and have to break that. So it went ahead and found the file for me when I actually didn't want it to, right? So as you can see, that search takes place essentially no matter what. Well, unless the file is found. Okay, let's just tell it that's broken. Open it up again. Okay, let's see where things are coming from. So our point of attention is the file M2 screw, this one right here. So we see that M2 screw is actually coming from the folder called step 5. That's because that's where it was able to find this file there. Let me go ahead and change the name. Oh, I cannot do it right now because it's open in SolidWorks. Let me close that. Yep. Okay. Alright. So now that it's broken there, let me actually fix it here. Okay, let's go ahead and open up that subassembly. Alright, everything opens, no problem. And this is exactly what I expect to see. My M2 screw is coming from the folder called FPV stack. We're going to make M2 screw disappear. So we're going to break it on purpose. Maybe I shouldn't say disappear. I'm just going to call it broken once again. When I open the assembly, naturally, what's going to happen is it's not going to be able to find it, and it's going to tell me, hey, I couldn't find that file, M2 screw. I don't know where it's at. What do you want to do? Let's say suppress for now. So here, I notice that, oh, sorry, not this one. Yeah, not this one. Also, I know that one of my files that opens up just fine is this one, called Pico BLX. Let's make sure it's coming from that folder. There it is, coming from step 5. Because I know that this file, Pico BLX, is actually opening out correctly. If I bring my missing files or my broken files to the same folder where this file opened successfully, next time I open my assembly, SolidWorks is going to search in that same folder and then find this bolt that is now missing. Okay, he found the bolt. There it is. And so now this should come from the same folder as the file Pico BLX is coming from. So M2 screw right there. Step 5, same place as Pico BLX. Okay. Alright, then the 6th path, SolidWorks was nice enough to actually add a little bit of intelligence to the fact that we all utilized folder locations, right? And so here, the 6th place is it'll actually search for that folder structure in a UNC path. So it'll actually try to find a network location with that. Okay, that I really don't have a good way to show you how it does that. But essentially what it does is it grabs a whole file, and instead of trying to search it with the C drive, it does it with a network location, just whatever you have available. And then the 7th location is described as the searches the full path where the document was last saved with its original drive designation. This is actually the place that you were thinking SolidWorks would be opening from. This is the place that this is the reference that you actually see, or you would expect right there. It's the last place that you saved the file in. So it's actually going through step 1 through 6 up until the point where it searches the last place where you actually saved the file in. And only once it's not found, once it does not find this file in that location, is when you actually get the unable to locate file dialog box. So what about PDM and Toolbox? So the two of them are actually special. But the same search routines occur for the vault, with the big difference that at the last one, that's where PDM comes in and it tells SOLIDWORKS this is where your file should be coming from. But if you have a file currently in memory and then you open an assembly from the vault, the first step is going to catch you, right? And so you have to, even though you still have to be aware of what you're doing with some files as you're opening them in PDM, PDM tries to take care of a few of those steps. Then toolbox files are actually special because if you have a toolbox that you're pointing to, SOLIDWORKS is always going to look for that file in whatever location you told it your toolbox is found. So if you change file names, you would be changing the file names of your toolbox, which would break it anyway. But if you point your toolbox to another location and then reopen the file, it's going to find the right file just in a different toolbox. Oh, and the toolbox is also a little special in the fact that you can actually change the name of the folder in your tools and options for the whole wizard, and it'll be just fine. So, save as and the options that exist. Unfortunately, we've gotten used to using save as, right, just in Word and Excel. Unfortunately, save as in Word and Excel doesn't work the same way in SOLIDWORKS. If you select Save As, what's going to happen is you're actually going to grab the existing file you have open, and when you say Save As, you're going to drop that one into the memory of the computer and then bring the new name in place and superpose your assembly components with the new name. You could accidentally break reference with this as well. Okay, what you want to do is actually read these descriptions here. The next option, Save as Continue, is the one that usually you want to use. What this does is it keeps the same file you have open, it creates a copy and leaves it closed in Windows. It never comes up in memory unless you go and double click it. This is the safest way to avoid cross-referencing. Okay, and then Save as Copy, which Save as Copy and Open, which will actually open up both files in memory and tell you which is the one that you want to keep in memory. You guys should definitely play around with those. They're lifesavers as well. So I got a question here asking, can you disable any of the search routines? You only have control over the first two, that being don't have the generic part name open in memory, and then the second one, deselect the external references option on your tools and options. The rest always go through. SOLIDWORKS will go through those different steps, and if it finds a file in any one of those steps, it doesn't keep going with the rest. You cannot just disable step 3 and step 4 and then let it have the rest open. It always runs through them. Okay, let's see. Alright, next, so how do you create a proper copy of all of your files? You use Pack and Go. When you use Pack and Go, SOLIDWORKS is actually going to make a completely separate copy of every single file and then make sure that every part and subassembly held within is going to be redirected properly to the top level assembly. And same goes for the top level assembly down the stream. You can also utilize these options to add a prefix or suffix to the names. That will actually help you make sure that you have a copy of those files, and you can make sure that's the case just by looking at the file name. And you can export it to a new folder or make a zip file that once exported will also redirect the relations to the proper assembly that you just exported. And you can also choose what files to actually not add. Okay, so what to avoid? You want to make sure that you are not using Save As without being aware of what it does. Okay? Be very careful of just Save As. Use the other options. Avoid moving or renaming files in Windows Explorer just doing it right through the regular interface. That one is a dead giveaway. Something else to avoid is directly working on network files, because this will accidentally cause people to override each other's work. And then also avoid clicking that "Don't show me again" checkbox unless you're planning to bring it back later. Okay, at least now that you know to bring it back, it's okay if you use it, but remember to bring it back. If something doesn't behave correctly, go right in there and then make sure that all of your options are showing when you're using SOLIDWORKS. Okay, so the takeaways from this webinar is the fact that now you guys know how to bring back all those dismissed messages, also with the added bonus of now you know where to increase the timer for the missing file warning. Also know, or keep in mind, avoid shared storage or network storage for your files as you're working on them live. Do a pack and go and then make a copy on your C drive and work on those files. Try to stay away from using generic part names like part 1, assembly 1, or test 1, test 2. And then use PDM if you have it. Okay. Once again, it comes included with SOLIDWORKS Professional and Premium. This brings us to the end of the presentation. Thanks for coming.